Alright, I'm back here with part 3, final part hopefully. Now, like I was saying at the end of part 2, basically Ian says that when he resumed writing not Ian, but when Ken Penders, I'm sorry if I get those two mixed up, it's just weird, I'm sorry about that, but I just can't help it. Both are good writers in their own ways. Both have made mistakes and everything, but again, getting back to what I'm saying, what Ken is saying here, and I mentioned this at the end of part 2, is that when he resumed writing the Sonic as a main feature in the comic, when he basically resumed writing the main story, he made it clear that he was going to correct the fiasco that Carl Bowlers had fostered upon fandom with the infamous slap in 134. And that he and Mike Caristero were determined to correct what was perceived by many as the worst moment in the book's history, but that neither one of them saw it getting corrected over the course of maybe 3 issues. Rather, it was decided that Sonic would play the field for a while, allowing him to discover why Sally was always the girl for him. But basically, now he also, basically, it kind of makes sense what he's saying here about certain things. Give me your comments on that. Now he does say one of the things that made it difficult during his resumption of being the head writer was that in some ways it was accidental. Initially, he was going to submit whatever stories struck his fancy and spread the rest of his time working on other projects. So he wrote stories published in 150 and 151 first. Then he was asked to begin writing in what eventually became The Good, the Bad, and the Unknown, Part 1. He says that Carl Bowlers and he were supposed to alternate each successful chapter, but that the plan went out the window when he and Mike couldn't work things out. Somewhere during the writing of issues 146 through 149, Mike Polito decided he wanted stories to lead into the saga, which then resulted in Ken Penders, and I'm reading this right now, writing what eventually became 145. After finishing The Good, the Bad, and the Unknown, Ken Penders does recall then writing Line of Succession, the two-parter, upon which he was asked to then write what eventually saw print in 152. Now he mentions also that what was funny about reading Dan Dranson's reviews at the time, he says that basically what he says was that what was really funny was reading Dan Dranson's reviews at the time. Because this is Ken Penders saying this. He says what was really funny was reading Dan Dranson's reviews at the time, because he hadn't a clue what turmoil was going on, because Dan Dranson, didn't have a clue of what turmoil was going on behind the scenes trying to get the book out. Ken says he always had a policy saying nothing in defense when paying a customer criticized his work. So basically Ken never really criticized or never said anything defensive or in his defense when someone like Dan Dranson criticized his work. And that Ken, according to what he says, just shook his head and sighed. And that no one knew about the rewrites that were demanded, often which made no sense, basically saying that he had no idea why the rewrites had to be made anyway. Nor did he get paid for them, which I agree he should have got paid for them, because that's time he really didn't need to do. nor did the changes to the story links and format that changed at a moment's notice. Basically, again, I agree he should have been paid for these rewrites and for the fact that he had to make these changes at that moment's notice to the length of the story and the format. Now, he does say what made it even funnier was that while Dan was slamming the book, Dan Dranson was slamming the book, sales were going up and people paid attention, I was in charge of the storylines again. Basically, he's saying that, well, Dan Dranson, who has done some great reviews and some negative reviews, was slamming the book, basically criticizing it. Sales were going up, and people were paying attention at the fact that Ken Penders himself was now writing the storylines again, was basically the head writer. And that came to much of the audience approval. So basically those that criticize, let's say, Ian's work right now because it's not on the level of Ken, or even if they don't know about Ken and they still criticize Ian's work, would have approved what they saw with Ken. And that's the way I look at it. Now, Ken says the way he saw it, he was going to have fun writing what he did. Basically, he was going to have fun. And it showed and the audience responded. Basically, Ken's work showed he was having fun, and it showed that the audience loved his work, loved what they were reading. He says the only part he saw where he could have tread darkly is the fall of Snively. He said Mike wanted him to set up Snively for the audience to embrace him as they never did before, only to kill him off to rattle everyone. Announcing to everyone not to take the book for granted, as for one never knows what to expect. So basically, from reading this, and again, I'll put the link here at the bottom, and you can read it yourself. According to this, Ken Penders had a different outline of a lot of things. More importantly, he had an outline of how the wedding between Bunny and Antoine was going to take place. Bunny and Antoine, like I said, wasn't going to get married after an issue where the proposal took place. No, he was going to set it up to where the proposal would have been accepted in 175 after many attempts, if you will, and many attempts by Antoine and many questions on Bunny's behalf on whether she could live a normal life or not, with her bionic parts, that after the proposal was accepted in 175, it would have been 15 issues later that we would have seen the wedding take place in issue 200. So instead of seeing, like I said, the destruction of Novel in 175, as well as the victory over the Eggman Empire again, we would instead saw something that would have had, instead 175 would have saw the 175 would have saw the proposal accepted by Bunny from Antoine and the wedding in 200. As well as along the way we would have saw Sally and Sonic back together, and that they get back together as a couple, and that the infamous slap, if you will, that Carl Bowlers, even Ken Penders blames Carl Bowlers for this, that took place in 134 would have been corrected once and for all and probably never mentioned again. So really a lot of things that would have happened had Ken stayed on, to me, would have definitely made a lot more sense than some of the issues we see now. I'm not saying that Ian Flynn is not doing a good job as a writer, and not some of the things we're seeing doesn't make sense. Some of the stories Ian Flynn does write are good. Let's not deny that. They are good. But in a way, they're from a fan's perspective. This is from an actual comic book writer's perspective. This is what he would have done, Ken Penders would have done if he stayed on. But that's just my report in reading off of what I read here. Again, I will put the link down here in the description box. Tell me what you think, comment on how you feel, and I will talk to you all later.